Hello everyone, welcome to the new session of Methods of Weed Control Part 1. So in this session we are going to study about herbicidal control of weeds. So weeds can be controlled by the use of herbicides. So we are going to study about the herbicidal control of weeds. But there are some limitations of herbicides, so that also we are going to cover up. Biological control. We will study about what are the biological control of weeds in this session too. So these are some of the topics that we are going to cover up in this particular session. So let us start. The first thing is the herbicidal control of weeds. How to control weeds? There are different methods, right? So the first method is the herbicidal control of weeds. Herbicides are the chemicals capable of killing or inhibiting the growth of the plant. So these are the chemicals that are used to kill herbs, right? And they also inhibit the growth of the herbicide plants. In last 40 years or so, man has greatly improved upon his weeding efficiency by supplementing the conventional weeding method with herbicides. So they are using conventional method, old methods of farming, right? And in that, the weeding, what they are doing, they are just taking the weeds with manually from the cropland. So now what they are doing, they are using some herbicides to kill the herbs. So it has saved farmers of undue repeated intercultivation and hoeing and has helped him in obtaining satisfactory weed control where the physical methods often fail. So generally in older times what they do, they use the physical method to take out all the weeds manually from the croplands. But now they are using chemical based herbicides. So today we are having over more than 1500 herbicides in common use for the selective and non-selective weed control in the different areas. So there are so many different herbicides, right? There are some specific herbicides that are crop specific, right? So we can select according to the crop our herbicides and we can do this, we can spray this herbicides in our cropland to get rid of the unwanted herbs from our cropland. So these chemicals vary greatly in their molecular structures, mobility within the plant. So there are different herbicides based on these functions. They are also different according to the selectivity, fate in soil, response to the environment. So, many chemicals have shown high codes of selectivity to certain crops, killing the weeds effectively. So, some herbicides are very selective for the crops, very specific for the crops, certain crops. So, they can kill the weeds effectively for that particular crop. But proper selection of the herbicide, its rates, time, and method of applications are very important to obtain the desired degree of weed control and crop selectivity. So before using the herbicide, we must know what is the rate of this killing the herbicides of by this particular herbicide, right? So the rate is very important. What is the rate of killing herbs by the herbicide? What is how much time it takes to kill the herbs? What are the other application by using such herbicides? Okay, so that are very important to obtain the desired degree of weed control and crop selectivity, right? Herbicides are tool and tool must be used with the care. So they are basically the tool and we must use the tool very carefully because it can harm to human mankind and also they can harm to the crop. So the use of herbicide is must be done very carefully. Many developing nations have made a good beginning in the use of herbicides in agriculture, but more comprehensive research need to be done before extending it to new situations. So, many herbicides in agriculture, right? It has been developed, but there is requirement of some more comprehensive research that need to be done before using this as a herbicide on the commercial basis, right, in a real time situation. So that has to be done on a research basis prior to applying these herbicides in the cropland. Many chemicals have shown high codes of selectivity in certain crops, killing the weeds effectively, but proper selection of herbicides. So this is, we have already completed. Herbicides are the tool, and tool must be used with the care. Many developing nations have made a good beginning in the use of herbicides in agriculture. So many nations had taken an initiatives to make the use of herbicides, right? But more comprehensive research is still required. Herbicides were developed in the Western world primarily to overcome the shortage of farm labor for the weeding crops. So, it has been developed in the Western world primarily to overcome the shortage of farm labor. So, labor is a big problem in the Western countries. So, they have developed these herbicides that can kill the crops, and they do not require any labor that can take out the weeds from the cropland manually, right? So they developed what? Herbicides. However, during the past 4 decades, slowly the utility of the herbicide has also been realized in the labor-rich tropical world for the varied reason. But nowadays, we can see after the 4 decades that these herbicides are used in the tropical countries also because of various reasons. Given adequate labor and money to remove the weeds manually, still many advantages accrue from the judicious use of herbicides, right? So, if we are using this herbicides, right? So, it must be used judiciously, because they can cause a lot of pollution. They can kill even our crops if they are not used properly, right, at the proper time. So using this herbicide as a tool is a very, very important step. We must follow the rules and regulations of using these herbicides. So important among these are the following points. What are those? In monsoon season, intense rainfall may make this physical weeding infeasible. So in the monsoon season, it is recommended that the herbicide should not be used, because it can even pollute our water body. Herbicide can use to ensure the freedom of crops from the weeds under such a condition. So if we are using, then also we must take care that if you are using the herbicide in this monsoon season, that you must be ensured that you are getting freedom from the weeds, right, in such condition. So also during the early crop growth period, when many fields need weeding simultaneously, even in the labor-rich countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Nigeria, and Sudan, there is certainly a weeding bottleneck in the crop production. So weeds are competing with our crops. They are also growing along with our crops, right? So if you are allowing this herbicide, use of herbicides in your cropland to eradicate these weeds, then it may affect your crop production as well. So this is very important to take care. The soil applied herbicides can be of great help in these regions in the boosting crop production. So the soil that is applied with the herbicides, okay, that can be great help in these regions as boosting the crop production, because it will only alter the numbers of herbs, right? It will not affect our crop production. So this is one of the important, the soil applied herbicide we can use. Herbicide can employ to control weed as they emerge from the soil, to eliminate weed crop interference even at a very early stage of the crop growth. So we can use this weedicides, okay, or the herbicides at the time when the wheat crops are growing along with the initial growing at the young stage. They are at the young stage and they are growing along with the crop. But by physical method, weeds are removed after they have offered considerable competition to the crop, and rarely at the critical time. But if we are using the physical method, so in this method, we can remove the crop, right? But it has already given a competition to the crop, right? So if you are removing the weeds, it should be removed at a very initial level, because once the weed got established, once it gives the blossom, once it gives a setup of seeds, then it can give rise to some new plants even, right? So it is very important at which stage we are removing the herbs. So thus herbicides provide a benefit of timely weed control. So this time is very important. At what time we are controlling, whether we are going for the physical method or we are going the using the herbicides, the time is very important. At what time we are using the physical method or this herbicides. So herbicide can kill many weeds that survive by mimicry. For example, wild oat, Avena species in wheat, and barnyard grass, that is Echinocola species in rice, right? So these are doing the mimicry. They look like a plant, our crop plant, but actually they are the weeds. So they are the mimicry herbs. Weeds that resemble crop plants usually escape by physical weeding. So this is one of the drawback of the physical method. That sometime what happened, the crop plant that usually escape by the physical method, right? Because we do not take out that weed plant because it closely resembles the crop plant. So why we will remove that plant, right? So they get escape by removing. Herbicidal control does not dictate strict row spacing. In physical weed control, on the other hand, the crop rows have to be sufficiently wide to accommodate the weeding implement. Else, hand weeding and hand pulling of weed has to be restored to. So, in the physical method, one thing we must think about, that if we are planning our crop in this cropland, then spacing of the crop is very important. Spacing of the crop. Now we know that at how much space. So these are the rows of spacing, like this. These are the rows of spacing. So these are our crop plants. And if new crop are growing like this, new other weeds are growing, we know that these are not at the position of our crop plant. So basically these are the weeds, and we can go for this physical control, right? But in the using the herbicide, this is not a problem. So herbicide bring about the longer lasting control of the perennial weeds and brushes than it is possible with the physical control method. So herbicide is having advantage on this thing, that they are having a longer lasting control over perennial weeds, right? And they can reduce the bushes of these perennial weeds. Many modern herbicides can translocate considerably deep in the underground system of the weeds and damage them, right? So many modern herbicides, they can translocate deep in the underground and they can damage the weeds. We can get rid of these weeds in that ways. Herbicides are convenient to use in the spiny weeds which cannot be reached manually. When cultivators or hoes are worked hard in an attempt to uproot the established weed, they may cut many feeding roots of a crop like maize, which are appreciable in the first 10 centimeter depth of the soil. So this is one of the drawback of the physical method. When you are taking out the roots of any weeds from its roots. So sometime what happen, with our cultivars or the hose, we can damage our roots of the main crop, right? So this thing, we cannot go for a physical method when the crop has already been established and there are some harmful weeds. So at that time, what we can use? We can use chemical herbicides. So their lateral growth fully occupies the inter-row spaces. Herbicides are safe or erodible lands where the tillage may accelerate soil and water erosion. Excessive tillage in any case spoils soil structure, right? If we are doing a lot of tillage, then it can destroy or spoil the soil structure. So reduces organic matter content and depletes the moisture status of the soil. So if lots of tillage we are doing, then all the wet soil that will come up and all that water that is present in the soil get evaporated, right? So the moisture content of the soil can also get reduced in this way. So herbicide kill weeds in situ without permitting their dissemination. So in this case, herbicide can use to kill these herbs, right? And these herbs, and they will not affect the soil structure. Tillage, on the other hand, may fragment the vegetative propagules of the weeds and drag them in a new sites. Herbicide spray easily reach the weeds growing in obstructed situation such as utility, right of way, under the fruit trees and on undulating lands. Right. So this is the benefit of using the herbicide rays, because when you take out the herbs, it may fragment the vegetative propagules of the weeds, and that vegetative weed fragment of the vegetative propagules will be again present in the soil, and over a time they can give rise to a new weeds. So basically, we are not removing the weeds, we are actually propagating in that way. So what we can do, we can use herbicides. Some other benefits of using herbicides include favor labor problem. So labor problem is not an issue in this case. Greater possibility of farm mechanization, easier crop harvesting, and lower cost of farm produce. Some other benefits. In dry land agriculture, effective herbicidal control ensures higher water use by the crop and less crop failures due to the drought. So in dry land agriculture, what has happened? We can use this herbicidal control because it ensures the higher water use by the crops and less crop failure due to the drought. So when you take out physically or manually these herbs, right, the soil inside the present inside this ground, it will emerge out, which is having some water. So the water will reduce in this physical method. So in the dry region, we can use herbicides. Like any other method, weed control, herbicides have their own limitation, but there are some limitation to these herbicides. So, but with proper precaution, these limitations can be overcome markedly. Important limitation in the use of herbicides are as follows. So let us understand what are those limitations. In herbicidal control, there is no automatic signal to stop a farmer who may be applying the chemical inaccurately till he sees the results of the crop sprayed or in the rotation of the crop that follows. Yes, there is no automatic signal that this much amount of spray is okay for removal of the weeds from the cropland, right? So how much chemicals he is applying and for how much time he is applying, that we do not get any signal. Even with the herbicides are applied accurately, these may interact with the environment to produce unintended results. So these herbicides are what based? These are chemical based. Actually, these are the chemical based herbicides. So it will have some adverse effect on our environment, right? It interact with the environment to produce unintended results. Herbicide drifts, wash off, and runoff can cause considerable damage to the neighboring crops, leading to unwanted quarrels. So what will happen? We have used the herbicide that is crop specific. And when there is a wash off or runoff, then what will happen? These herbicides can move to the neighboring cropland also. And there are some different crops. And you all know that these herbicides are crop specific. So what will happen? It will have some adverse effect on the neighboring crops, leading to unwarranted quarrels. Depending upon the diversity in farming, a variety of herbicide must be stocked on a farm to control weeds in the different weeds. So fields. So we are having diversity in our crops, right? So variety of herbicide must be used. It have a stock in with the farmers. So whenever we are using this particular crop, we can use this herbicide, right? It is something like that. So you are having the number of crops, then accordingly you must have number of herbicides. So this is one of the drawback. On the contrary, for the physical control of weeds, a farmer has to possess only one or two kinds of weeding implements for his entire farm. So, but in the physical method, yes, labor is required, the money will be required, but there is no such stocking things that you have to stock, right? So in the physical method, only one or two implements is required, and with that, in any crop you can eliminate these weeds. Above all, the herbicidal control require a considerable skill on the part of the user. Yes. So when you are using these herbicides, right, you must be skilled that how to use these herbicides. Oh, he must be able to identify his weeds and possess a considerable knowledge about the herbicides and their proper usage. So prior the using of this herbicide, there must be knowledge of herbicides and their proper usage as well. You must identify your weeds also. So identification of weeds, knowledge of the herbicides, and how to use that herbicide. This you must know before using any herbicides. Sometimes an error in the use of herbicides can be very costly. In herbicide treated soil, usually the crop failures can not be made up by planting a different crop of choice. So when you are using a herbicide and if you have not used in a proper way, right, amount is not in a proper way, then it may cause damage to even our crop, right? And at that time you cannot grow some other crop also. So it can affect the soil even. The selection of the replacement of crop has to be based on its tolerance to the herbicide already applied. Military use of herbicide is the greatest misfortune of their discovery. In Vietnam, 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, for examples, were used for defoliating the forest and crops, leading to miseries to the innocent civilization. So this defoliation of the crops and forest leading to the miseries because no food were there. So we in Vietnam, this herbicide once it has been used. So that is why it is said that using a herbicide is a skill based activity. So once anyone is using this herbicide, he must know the ins and out of it. He must have a knowledge of herbicides, how to use it, and also identify the weeds. So in future, the chemical warfare with the residual herbicide may be even more devastating, which must be avoided at all cost. Use of living organism, insects, disease. Now we are having biological control method as well. After the use of herbicide, biological control method. So use of living organism, we are using the living organism, insects, disease organism, herbivorous fish, snails, or even competitive plants for the control of weeds is called biological control methods. In biological control method, it is not possible to eradicate weeds, but weed population can be reduced. So we cannot eradicate weeds 100%, but yes, we can control the population by the biological method. This method is not useful to control all types of weeds. Introduced weeds are the best targets for the biological control. So this method cannot be used for any type of weed, but yes, introduce weeds, that for that we can use the biological control. The bioagent must feed or affect only one host and not other useful plants. It must be free of predators or parasites. It must readily adapt to environment conditions. The bioagent must be capable of seeking out itself to the host. It must be able to kill the weeds or at least prevent its reproduction in some direct or indirect way. So we are not controlling this weeds in a direct way, but yes, we are controlling. Okay, so it must be able to kill the weeds, at least prevent its reproduction. Do not allow to reproduce these weeds. So the weeds is not being eradicated, but yes, you can control the population of it. The bioagent must be capable of seeking out itself to the host. So whatever the bioagent we are using, it must capable of seeking out, it must reach to its host. It must possess a reproductive capacity sufficient to overtake the increase of its host species without too much delay. So it must get established to the host species, right? So what are the merits of this method? Least harm to the environment. This method is not going to harm the environment in any way. But yes, herbicidal method can harm. No residual effect, relatively cheaper and comparatively long-lasting effect. Will not affect the non-targeted plants and safer in usage. So it will not going to affect our crops. It will only eliminate or stop the reproduction and control the population of the herbs or the weeds. So demerits: multiplication is costlier, control is very slow, and success of the control is very limited. So very few host specific bioagents are available at present. So this is one of the problem while using the bioagent, because they are host specific. So you have to understand that this weed can have a host for, can act as a host for this bioagent. Right. So the knowledge of the bioagent is also very, very important in this respect, I think. Yes. Multiplication is costlier. The multiplication of the bioagent is quite costlier. Control is very slow. It is not as fast as in the case of using herbicides. Differential growth habits, competitive ability of the crops and varieties prevent the weed establishment. Example, the case of groundnut, cowpea, fast growing and so good weed suppressor. So if your growth of your plant is very quick in comparison to the weeds, right? So that is not going to harm your crop in much greater way. So insect kill the plants by exhausting plant food reserves, defoliation, boring, and weakening the structure of the plant. If we are using this bioagent, then it can kill the plant by exhausting the plant food. It will use away all the plant food and the plant food will not have any food and it can die. Defoliation. It can cause the defoliation, so it cannot photosynthesize and eventually dies off. Boring and weakening of the structure of the plant. So these insects can bore, they can weaken the structure of the plant and ultimately the plant can dies off. Pathogenic organism damage the host plant through enzymatic degradation of the cell constituents, production of toxin, disturbance of hormone system, obstruction in the translocation of food materials and minerals, and malfunctioning of the physiological process. So there are so many things that these pathogenic organism can do in the host plant. The first thing, enzyme degradation. It can degrade some of the important enzyme of the host plant, and without that the plant cannot live. Cell constituent, it can harm even the cell constituent and it can lead to the production of toxin. It can even disturbs the hormone production in the plants. Obstruction in the translocation of food, it do not allow the food to be transported, right? So eventually the other parts of the plant will not get food and they can die. So there are so many mode of action by these pathogenic organisms that take place in the host plant. Outstanding and feasible example of the biological control, weed control. Larvae of the Coctoblastis cactorum and a moth borer control prickly pear opuntia species. So opuntia is what? Is a cactus plant, right? Prickly pear. So this larvae of the Coctoblastis cactorum, that is a moth borer that can control prickly pear, that is the opuntia species. The larvae tunnel through the plants and destroy it. So this larvae can tunnel in the plant and it can destroy this opuntia. In India, it is controlled by the coccinelle insects, Dactylopus indicus and Dactylopus tomentosus. Lantana camera is controlled by the larvae of the Corsiodesma lantana. So this is a exotic species, right? This is an exotic species, came from the other country, and it do not allow other plants to grow when these particular plants are growing. So these are the weeds, right? And it can be controlled by the larva of Crocidosema lantana, a moth borer in the flower stems and eat flowers and fruits. So the plant ultimately dies. Cuscuta species is controlled by the Milena gromyza cucsute. So this is a insect and this is the Cuscuta, that is a plant parasite. Plant parasite. In Hindi we call it as Amar Bale. So it can be controlled by this Milena gromyza. Cyprus rotundus, grass. Bactra varutana, a moth borer. This can control this grass. Ludwigia porifera is a comparatively denuded by the Altica cyanea, a steel blue beetle. Herbivorous fish, tilapia controls the algae. So the algae that can lead to the eutrophication in the ponds. So we can have this tilapia fish and it can eat away all the algae. Common carp, a fish, non-herbivorous fish, controls submerged aquatic weeds. So in the aquatic environment also we can have this biological control. It is apparently due to the uprooting plants while in search of food. Snails prefer submerged weeds. Bioherbicides or the mycoherbicides, the use of plant pathogen which are expected to kill the targeted weeds. These are the native pathogen cultured artificially and sprayed just like the post-emergent herbicides each season on the target weed and particularly in the crop area. So these are the plant pathogen. They are sprayed on the weeds in the crop field and they are not doing any harm to the cropland, but yes, they are targeting the weeds. Fungal pathogen of weeds have been used to the larger extent that the bacterial, viral or nematode pathogen, because bacteria and viruses are unable to actively penetrate the host and require natural opening or the vectors to initiate disease in plants. But these fungal pathogen, they can introduce their hyphae in the tissue, right? And they can easily get established on the weed plant. So here the specific fungal spores for their fermentation product is sprayed against the target weed. So these spores of these fungus sometimes, or even the specific fungus whole hyphae with the hyphae, they are used as a bioherbicides. So this is all about this session. We will have some more session on the methods of weed control. Okay. Thank you so much.